Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. As we welcome you once again to the airwaves of Salam Media. It is a Wednesday night edition of Wednesday Nights with myself, Inayat Wadi, with you right until 9 p.m. tonight, inshallah. And as we look ahead at the panel discussion this evening, we are welcoming our listeners at Salam Media on the various platforms, on the YouTube channel, and also on Facebook. Now, we are going to be focusing on the Taliban and we're focusing on Afghanistan. And this is still going to be a major talking point globally for months to come. And we've seen yesterday the US pull out of Afghanistan, which had finally taken place, but also leaving a lot of destruction behind. I think for many of us, we've seen the images at Kabul airport, where we've seen the destruction to equipment and helicopters, aeroplanes, and also learning about some vehicles that were actually laced by a chemical, a poisonous chemical. Now, all of that taking place after 20 years. And the key question here is, what did the United States of America achieve after 20 years in Afghanistan? But more importantly, going forward, now that the Taliban is back in power, what does this mean for the rest of the world? What does this mean for the geopolitics of the region? What does it mean for countries like Pakistan, India, the Kashmir? And also looking at the Muslim world at large, looking at the Middle East in terms of how are they going to be responding to the Taliban government. Now, we've got quite a panel that assembled tonight, and shortly we will be joined by Dr. Shahida Wizarat out of Pakistan. We've got Umar Sharif joining us out of India. We've got attorney Ziad Patel, and we also have got Salman Khan from the South African Kashmiri Action Group. But before we get to the panelists, we're going to play out this video clip, take a look at what, in fact, it actually summarizes quite well with regard to what America has been doing in Afghanistan, or what they haven't achieved in Afghanistan in the last 20 years.
They are the victims. And at Kabul airport, you can see this American arrogance in its purest form when 60 Afghans died, and yet people are asking you to pray for the Marines as if they're the only ones with souls. How Christian of you. This whole situation could have been avoided if the US did not hijack the airport for itself and hadn't invaded Afghanistan to begin with. Because people didn't just die yesterday, they've been dying every day and suffering every day for 20 years. But the media don't want you to remember that. They want you to focus on how bad the withdrawal is, so you forget how bad the war was. They're trying to whitewash history and make you think that a brutal occupation that lasted 2 decades was some kind of humanitarian mission. 3,000 people tragically lost their lives on 9/11. And after the US invaded Afghanistan and Iraq, who had nothing to do with 9/11, it killed 10, 20 times more people. You call that a war on terror? That's a war of terror. And then you have these generals going on CNN yesterday claiming that ISIS did the attack in collaboration with the Taliban, their enemy. They just make up the most insane crap to try and keep the war going. Today it's Al-Qaeda, then it's Al-Qaeda in Iraq, then it's ISIS, then it's ISIS-K. It's never ending. They always have a new excuse, a new boogeyman. Just keep making up new threats to bomb this country and invade that country and sanction this country. Meanwhile, the defense and weapons contractors, their friends, are making trillions of dollars. And if you look where these groups come from, who funded them, it's the United States. The US says it's fighting Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. Meanwhile, it's funding Al-Qaeda in Syria, and Israel is helping them too. And then they want to come and sell you this nonsense of a democracy and women's rights. Oh, really? Is Saudi Arabia a democracy? Colombia and Israel respect human rights? How come the US isn't invading them? Most of the hijackers on 9/11 were Saudis, and instead they blamed Iraq and Afghanistan. This whole war on terror is a giant scam. It is a racket. And watch out, because they're going to keep inventing bullshit threats and starting wars and bombing and killing people so they can make money. It is the biggest crime of the 21st century. They are making a killing, literally, and getting away with it.
Well, that is the biggest crime in the 21st century, and that is what we are talking about this evening. And it's time to welcome our panelists this evening to the show. And we have got, firstly, out of India, we've got Sheikh Umar Sharif, who is joining us. Sheikh Umar Sharif, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh to all of you.
Yes, Jazakallah khairan so much. And I know you are with Discover Islam Education Trust. We also have got Salman Khan, Kashmir Center for the African Union, and also the South African Kashmiri Action Group. Salman, Assalamu alaikum to you.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, my dear brother, and to all your beautiful listeners, plus all the panelists around the world.
Attorney, humanitarian, and activist Yad Patel. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome.
Walaikum assalam and Jazakallah khair for having me on your show.
Yes, and I see we are still waiting on Professor Shahida Wizarat, Institute of Business Management out of Karachi, to join us. But as she joins us shortly, we obviously will link up with her. Now, we are going to start with you, Sheikh Umar Sharif, and the Taliban obviously back in power in Afghanistan. Major news, huge, in fact, impact that it is having in Afghanistan at this point in time, but also the world is watching. And tonight we want to focus a lot on the Taliban, where to from here, but also looking at the geopolitics of the region and just looking at the Taliban. Firstly, your thoughts that they are now back in power and how they got back in power after defeating a superpower like the United States of America, and also what sort of response there has been in India to the return of the Taliban.
Well, it's a very complex issue to start with. I have to say that we have to broadly classify the situation into two ways. One of the thing is a positive thing, another thing is a very gloomy thing. So the positive thing is that the Taliban has got the right to drive away the US invaders who have a kind of a neo-colonialist mindset. So for them to come back to power after 1996 to 2001 reign, that which they ruled in the past, it is a positive thing. But at the same time, a gloomy thing is that Taliban in 1996 to 2001, they were ruling the state based on certain rules and regulations which had Islamic values and the components of the Sharia, but it was exaggerated in a way that they were crude when they were applying the law. So, especially when we talk about women's right to education, in the past 1996 to 2001, they had deprived the women of education. They did not give them the basic rights for education. So that is something which is a concern, and their level of foreign policies with their neighboring states back then was not all that conducive. And now that they have come, let us see how they are going to perform in their second coming. We hope and pray that they're going to be more sensitive towards their bordering territories, and they play their cards very calculatively and judiciously in order to maintain peace within their own lands and peace with their neighboring territories. Because unless and until they have the essence of ruling the state with farsightedness, they will not accomplish anything for themselves or for the people of their own state. So we can see it in two ways. As I said, the positive thing is that they have the right to rule their land. But the second issue is the gloomy thing, that they cannot let anyone being oppressed in the name of applying the Sharia law. Because Sharia law is very vast, and they have to be sensitive to all the people there, so that the people of the people of Afghanistan are happy, first of all, and the people who are neighboring to the Afghanistan, they are also at peace.
Yes, Jazakallah for that. I see Dr. Shahida Wizarat has joined us. Dr. Shahida, assalamu alaikum and welcome.
Walaikum assalam. Thank you.
Yes, Dr. Shahida, obviously I'm going to come just talk to you, just looking at the initial response in Pakistan. And obviously Pakistan has been in the limelight for many, many years as far as Afghanistan is concerned, sometimes for the right reasons, sometimes for even the wrong reasons. And looking at Pakistan, particularly the northwest frontier that is bordering with Afghanistan, and there have been, many accusations that have been leveled against Pakistan as far as its involvement with the Taliban goes over the years. So just looking at Pakistan, the Pakistani reaction to the Taliban back in power.
I think we are very happy here in Pakistan that the Taliban have managed to overcome all the problems and the hurdles, and that they are going to be forming the government. Obviously, they are going to be facing many challenges, For example, obviously the powers that have had to retreat, they're not going to be very happy. And I think, as you already know, that India has already started getting terrorist activities organized in Afghanistan, and the US, UK, all these, Israel, all these are countries which are spoilers to peace. Uh, so I think there is. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you loud and
Okay.
clear, Dr. Shahida.
So I think that Pakistan will obviously, and also the fact that Pakistan has already, made the fence. I think that is going to be very helpful, because I think the spoilers to peace will not be able to get a lot of refugees in, and I think what the US and the Western countries are trying to do is that they want to uh, export this all this terrorism and all this war to Pakistan. So I think that the fence that the Pakistan army has built is going to be very helpful, and that will help us in containing the refugees. And I think that the whole world should try to cooperate with the Taliban. For example, if you look at the United States signed the Doha Agreement with the Taliban on 29th February 2020. And the text was adopted unanimously by the United Nations. And the US pledged to release 5,000 Taliban and lift sanctions against the Taliban. And the Taliban also pledged to allow foreign delegates to leave. But in spite of this agreement, you see that the United States has, I think it has breached the Doha Agreement by withholding $9 billion that belong to Afghanistan. So I think that United States is, carrying on a kind of a duplicity, and the policies are very, I would say that there are, on the one hand, it says that it wants to be at peace, and it wants to have a peace agreement with the Taliban. But on the other hand, it is also acting as a spoiler to peace. It is withholding Taliban's money. And, I think by doing that, what the United States is going to do is that it is going to push Taliban more and more towards China. Because obviously, if Afghanistan doesn't have the money, then Chinese will come forward and they will lend them some money. So that means that the Taliban and the Chinese connection is going to become stronger. And if that's what the US wants, that's fine. But I think the US should not breach its agreement that it signed, the Doha Agreement, and it should release the money that it owes to the Taliban, to
Jazakallah
Afghanistan.
for that.
Sorry.
Yes, Salman Khan, just to bring Salman into the discussion. And Salman, I see you are on audio, and I'm hoping that you've been able to hear quite clearly in terms of what Umar Sharif and Dr. Shahida have been saying. And I think the point that Dr. Shahida made with regard to the agreement. Now, Salman, being an activist, being someone who has actually monitored that area, the geopolitics of that area for a very, very long time, particularly interested in Kashmir and the impact is definitely going to be felt on Kashmir with the return of the Taliban. But also at the same time, as Dr. Shaida mentioned, the United States not keeping or honoring the agreement that they had signed in Doha. And for years, as far as Kashmir is concerned, there have been many agreements, there have been many United Nations resolutions as well. And just looking at, your take on what some of these developments mean, Salman.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Jazakallah. Thank you for inviting me to this beautiful program and a very good, knowledgeable panel. Inadbhai, I think you've been following the story of Afghanistan for the last, I think, 30 years, same like I do. And I think, there are a lot of people missing one very salient point. The geopolitics. The geopolitics is the Afghanistan hold a very central position in the Central Asian Republic. And it has been said, if you go back to read the Rudolph Coupling, and many other historians over the last 200 years, you'll see they all have said that whoever control Afghanistan control the Southeast Asia and the Central Asian Republic. Now, the gist of the thing is, for the last 40 years, first you have the Russian. I'm not going to go into the history of the prehistoric and into the new classical history. Let's go 40 years back. Why the Russian invaded Afghanistan in the first place, and then why left it? Why America come to help and fight, or why glorify American glorified the CIA, glorified the Mujahideen and recruited the Mujahideen around the world. Let me take first. In 1979, when there was a turmoil, there was a political turmoil in Afghanistan, Russia didn't come to stabilize the Afghanistan. The main motive was at the Cold War that to control the Hot Sea, which is the Arabian Sea, through the Kabul, from Kabul to Peshawar, and then of course is a few hundred kilometers that you got the Gwadar post. So they come to Kabul, and the minute they start rolling the tank into the Kabul and making headway toward the Pakistan, the what you call northwest border, American had a wake up call. They realized that these Russians are not only coming to stay in Afghanistan because there is nothing they will gain from being there to stabilize it. The main reason they wanted to come and make their headway, not to have the Hot Sea, but also to control the Shatul Arab. If you look at the geopolitical map, or you look at the map where the Gwadar port is, which is now the Chinese are very influential with the CPAC, from there is only 90 kilometers away the corridor of Strait of Hormuz, which is control the 70% of the oil and petroleum production passage to the world. Now, if the Russian could have got into, which could have been within a few months, if America didn't come with Pakistan to fight the proxy war, they could have created the barricade and controlled the oil supply to the world. So American come is, despite the Israelis and the own Congress, they handed over Pakistan a first squadron of the 40 aircraft, the F-16. And it's still, there was a big debate in that why are you giving a nuclear power who is going to become atomic power to nuclear power. But because America knew exactly the geopolitics, and they know exactly the motive of Russian moving from there, they're going to come and blockade it. Okay, they fight the proxy war, they glamorized the Talib, they glamorized the Mujahideen first. Then of course they left when the Russian exited from there in the Washington Accord, and they left it the Afghanistan. Then, of course, what happened is from the 1988, the 10-year war finished in 1988, and when they left, there was a vacuum of a leadership in Afghanistan. And of course, the Russian also there was a two-pronged strategy for the Russia to come into the Afghanistan in 1979. One is to get into the Strait of Hormuz. The second one was the fear that if Islamic revolution of Iran spill over into the Afghanistan, and next stop will be those Pakistan, Turkmenistan, then of course they will be able to take it over, the Shiatism into that. So that was one of the Russia. Now, when they rolled back, America left Pakistan, all the bases in Pakistan and in Afghanistan, and they left it all the Mujahideen they recruited across the world, because it was all on the payroll. All the Mujahideen was on the payroll of American CIA. Now, when they left it, there was a vacuum of the leadership in the Afghanistan from 1988 to 1994. So the word Taliban, I want you to go and have a look at it. The word Taliban first time appeared in 1994. Why? Because when there was a vacuum, the Ahmad Shah Massoud from the Iranian border was getting a support from the Shiatism, and they were taking over province after one after another one. So now the Saudis and Americans, they realized that, the Iran influence will gonna get into the Afghanistan. So they exploited these youngsters. Those were the orphanage of the war from the Afghan, at the tender age of 11, 12, and 15-year-old, and give them a gadgets, give them a motorbike, give them a Ray-Ban glasses, and give them a gun, and turn them into the Taliban, and they call them a Taliban. Now, those are the people, those who had no education. They were the people who have never seen a school. They become a very rough and very, very hostile mujahid to fight the war. That's what the Umar Sharif was referring. The first time, the 1996, when they took it over, they were very harsh, because naturally their father wasn't there. They grew up into the war. So they was very hostile the way they were. Now, today's Taliban, if you look at it, how they're conducting themselves, how their attitude toward the world, they are very worldly. They have revolutionized it. They're no longer a militant outfit. They become a political thing. Now, American was there for the one reason. When they come, one is to stop Iran spilling into the Afghanistan. Secondly, the Turkmenistan, there was an oil and natural gas reserve was found by the Biridas, which is Argentinian company, and then of course the deal was almost there that we will make the pipeline from Turkmenistan, Caspian Sea basin to connect to the Pakistan Hot Sea, and then of course Taliban will get 15 cents per liter, and then the Taliban refused. They said, no, we want the 1 liter for this oil passing through our territory, and that's where the fall-off happened, and all of a sudden this 9/11 happened, where they come in. If you can go into the history, and then of course they stay there for quite a while to make sure Halliburton, the Dick Cheney, was responsible. His company Halliburton was building the longest petroleum pipeline from Turkmenistan to Afghanistan, and of course it was sitting onto the border of Pakistan to connect. But now the game was played. The Pakistan play a master stroke by not handing over, to have a economic pact, which called a CPEC, which is a China and Pakistan economic corridor. And when the Chinese start building in the time of the Musharraf, because Musharraf realized it, the Americans are now geostrategically aligned to India than Pakistan. And of course, they stopped giving the Pakistan another squadron of the F-16. $600 million was paid. They said, we give you the soya bean, or we will give you the maize meal, and we will not return your money. So, of course, Musharraf policy was to make Pakistan more resilient, and the Chinese came and built up the port. Now, for America, the game was over, because if that pipeline cannot go through to Pakistan, because the Chinese already have set up the port. So those geopolitics played, and America see that now, already realize it, that they cannot continue to sustain their presence because it's costing them $450 billion per annum, and in the last 20 years they spend over $2.6 trillion. So American economy will suffer exactly the way that the Russian economy suffered, and it's become a black hole. Russian black hole of the economy was Afghanistan, and if the America continue to hold on to into the Afghanistan, that will be another black hole, and America will become economically depressed and maybe become a disintegrated the way the Russian. And of course, what happened in the last few years, the president of the United States of America, Donald Trump, he was more of a businessman than he was a politician, and he said, let's count the cost of the war, let's see where our losses are and cut it off. And then they decided, no, we need to pull it out. So it's not the Joe Biden who decided, it was a Donald Trump who decided we need to pull it out, because otherwise American economy will continue to drain fiscal resources into the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, and he pull out his thing. So
yes, Salman, can I just stop you there for a minute, please? I'll come back to you. Obviously, there are a number of issues that obviously you've raised, and you've obviously painted a wonderful picture on the background. Just bringing Attorney Ziad Patel now into the discussion. Now, obviously, Ziad, if you could unmute your mic, please. And you being an activist, you come from a humanitarian background. And at the end of the day, we know whatever America does impacts on the rest of the world. In many instances, whatever America does plays obviously, in favor of Israel as well. Now, we know that when you look at India, when you look at Israel, they've been having basically a dream ride under the US umbrella for a very, very long time. And looking at Afghanistan, the support that had come, in the initial war on terror had also come from the Middle East. It came from a number of Muslim countries out in the Middle East, from the Arab world as well. And just to look at, when we're talking about geopolitics, it also has got an impact right across the world in politics in the Middle East, for instance, because we've seen what had happened with Egypt when Mohammed Morsi came into power, and Islamic government obviously wasn't palatable to the likes of the Saudis, to the likes of the United States of America. We've seen the removal of Mohammed Morsi, and we're looking at the Taliban once again. We're looking at the Islamic government. So in this context, just looking at, obviously your thoughts and your take on some of these developments.
Jazakallah khair, Inayat, and once again, very good evening to your viewers, and shukran for having me on your show. I think the situation in the Middle East and in Central Asia is a quagmire, but most certainly this quagmire has been created by none other than the Imperial United States, NATO, and the G7, and as we would call it, Western civilization and its imposition of its own understanding of moral values, which it says that the world is supposed to account to its human rights and the upholding of fundamental human rights. But clearly, as your previous guest, Salman, has mentioned, there's always a geopolitical take in the conflict in this region. And most certainly that relates to natural resources, oil and gas, and important economic corridors. And who has access to those economic corridors controls actually the power in the region. The United States is very clear in that in its own country, it would look at the protection of democracy, or supposedly the protection of democracy in the manner it treats its own citizens, as a protector in the 21st century, and based on fundamental human rights for its own people. But clearly, when it comes to its foreign policy, it is underpinned by the US's what you would call national interests and the protection of those national interests in the geopolitical conflicts that transpire. To make things very clear, yes, Mohamed Morsi government in Egypt was not going to be sustainable to the US imperial agenda and to the UK and European states. And also there is the threat of now a Taliban government, and I don't believe that the Taliban government in its particular stance is immutable. And they have, in some instances, from listening to their spokesperson and to some of their higher leadership, there seems to be an underlying position of wanting international community on their side. This is important for the kind of recognition that the Taliban government wants. And in order for this to happen, they would have to reform their very stringent policies and Islamic interpretation of Sharia. Brother Umar Sharif made some reference to the Sharia laws. And I think we need to be very clear. Let's take very simple prophetic examples to your broader viewers out there. We know that the beloved Prophet, peace be upon him and his holy household, in his first marriage he married Lady Khadija. And it was very well known that Lady Khadija was a business lady. And in fact, the beloved Prophet became an employee to Lady Khadija as he handled some of her business and trade activities. So that's the first example that Islam accepts and recognizes the rights of women to work. Another simple example, and we call this the time of ignorance in Arabia, when Arabian girls were being buried alive. With the advent of Islam and the changing over from that time of ignorance and Jahiliyyah, Islam and the Prophet, our beloved Prophet, peace be upon him, ended the practices of burying Muslim girls alive. And that again gave an important right or fundamental right to girls. So we need to be clear when we understand what the interpretations of Sharia are, and certainly within the broader Muslim community and its interpretation of Islamic jurisprudence would go further and beyond what is provided in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in the fundamental protection of rights to equality, dignity, and so forth. Islam has brought that 1400 years ago. So when this argument comes out about, the fear for a Sharia kind of a government, first of all, it's playing on certain rhetoric on previous Taliban and its interpretation on these kind of policies. And certainly there was oppression of women and children, and their basic rights were negated. But yes, if they want to evolve and they want to have Afghanistan reform into a future state for the 21st century, where there's respect for economic, respect for multi-ethnicity, culture, the prophetic model, and so forth, there has to be a reformation in the way they do things. So I think this fear pandering to the West about girls and women not being allowed to work is not an Islamic phenomena, but rather a cultural interpretation that was incorrect from the outset. Brother Inayat, as you know, my particular area of work pertains to lawfare, and predominantly this relates to the holding of war criminals accountable for crimes perpetrated with impunity. I've advocated for many years now in the Middle East and in occupied Palestine for the Palestinian rights. And I say it again, that if we are standing with the Palestinian people against Zionist occupation, which is illegal and unlawful under international law, then can we never justify the illegal and unlawful occupation of Afghanistan by US and imperial forces, which from the outset was illegal and unlawful and wrong. So I think we need to differentiate between international law and what international law recognizes. Do we accept the Western powers as our beacons of hope and beacons of example, when clearly they are not the true example in upholding human rights and fundamental rights, because national interests and protection of national interests and regional interests will always trump human rights when it comes to this kinds of conflict. And as we've heard about economic corridors, it all comes back to resources and the use of those resources. I just want to make mention of something short. And we know that the US has had a drone program, house invasions. They've killed young children. They've had night raids. There's black sites. There's torture chambers. There's a story of Dr. Afia Siddiqui, who continues to remain languishing in an American prison. And this is, in fact, to hide the American and US atrocities of and the evidence that she would disclose that has happened to her in Bagram prison. Yvonne Redley is a journalist that discovered Afia Siddiqui in Bagram prison as the Grey Lady of Bagram and her screams at night. Now, these are not the people by whom we should be taking example of speaking about protection of fundamental human rights or women's rights or the right to education and so forth. Just to make mention, in the Intercept article, it said that the Americans step on all the rules of war, human rights, all the things that they said that they'd bring to Afghanistan. And this was said by Warda Provincial Council Head Akhtar Mohammed Tahiri. They are conducting themselves as terrorists. They show terror and violence, and they think they'll bring control this way. Importantly, to bring to your viewers' attention, 12 boys were killed in a madrasa at Khail in a winter night, when among scores of civilians were massacred during at least 10 previously undocumented night raids in central Afghan province of Wardak. Beginning in December 2018 and continuing for at least a year, Afghan operatives believed to belong to an elite CIA-trained paramilitary unit known as Certain, in partnership with US Special Operation Forces and Air Power, unleashed a campaign of terror against civilians. This story is based on interviews with more than 50 Wardak residents, including 20 survivors and first-hand witnesses and 29 victims, relatives, and local residents who witnessed the aftermath of the killings within hours of when they occurred. Some of those accounts were corroborated by local officials, analysts, and community representatives. If you can just give me a chance to, I just want to go further down this article just to explain. Sorry, just give me a moment. It seems to have frozen.
Obviously,
Yes.
we can come back to that article if you are battling, if it is frozen.
Brother Mike, yeah, if I can just do this quickly. Madrasa killings, this was one of the aspects of which Afghan forces or US forces and Afghan forces at the time were involved. Soldiers entered the village madrasa and came out with several boys. We heard the boys begging for their lives, screaming and crying. This was said by a certain witness. That then we heard the shooting at dawn, and all men discovered a pile of 6 boys' bodies at the mouth of an irrigation channel. The youngest victim was 10. So I'll leave it at that. But this is the kind of atrocities that have been perpetrated by the CIA intelligence, Mossad, British intelligence with Afghan operatives. And I think this exodus of Afghanis out of Afghanistan and Kabul We must put that into perspective that they have been also complicit with the US state forces and fear reprisal under the circumstances of the gross human rights violations and atrocities perpetrated.
Yes, shukran for that, Ziad. What we're going to do is we're going to just play out another clip because I think this is very, very important to actually put this entire discussion into context. So we'll play out the clip and we'll get back to our panel.
Australia's elite troops raid an Afghan village. It's 2012, the height of the West war on the Taliban. A young man is captured. He seems to be unarmed. Do you want me to kill him? The soldier shouts at his commander.
Quick, no! Quick!
There are shots. The prisoner is dead. Nor was this a one-off. Soldiers sent to liberate accused instead of cold-blooded murder. Shameful is the verdict of Australia's army chief.
To the people of Afghanistan, on behalf of the Australian Defence Force, I sincerely and unreservedly apologise.
The inquiry condemns Australia's SAS for a so-called warrior culture, with young soldiers ordered to shoot prisoners as a first kill, a practice known as blooding. The report calls it all possibly the most disgraceful episode in Australia's military history. 39 Afghans were unlawfully killed by 25 soldiers, overwhelmingly from the SAS. 19, the report says, should face criminal investigation.
The killing, the unlawful killing of civilians and prisoners is never acceptable.
Australia's SAS bears the same name, boasts the same "Who Dares Wins" motto, and is modelled upon Britain's own Special Forces, which has faced similar allegations. There's been an inquiry here, but no one will face prosecution.
We lost this war, and one of the reasons for that is that the message we were giving to Afghan people, which is we're here to protect you, was being totally undermined by people who would raid houses in the middle of the night and murder people who were not involved in any form of terrorism or insurgent activity.
The UK government is changing the law to make it harder to prosecute soldiers for alleged war crimes. In Australia, the disgraced SAS unit is to be disbanded. John Ray, News at 10.
Yes, that was a clip, and this is obviously just to give us an indication as to what had actually happened and the open license, and Australia being part of the coalition of the willing at that point in time when they had gone into Afghanistan. And this is exactly what Attorney Ziad Patel has been talking about in terms of war crimes. And obviously, Australia doing something, but will the United States of America do something? Will the likes of Britain do something? Now, we're going to get back to Brother Umar Sharif out in India, and obviously looking at India and the position that India finds itself in, Brother Umar Sharif, from a geopolitical perspective. And just to understand, because we know that since 9/11, obviously India has been in the spotlight. We've seen things like the Mumbai attacks. We've seen India obviously becoming a lot more draconian in terms of its law, in terms of its policies as well, but also as far as its interest in Afghanistan is concerned, because India has had a huge interest. We've heard about the dam that was built in Afghanistan. So India obviously has had many ambitions in Afghanistan under the Karzai and the Ghani era. But with the Taliban at this point in time, obviously, this possibly could change. And just looking at it from a political perspective, the Taliban in power, how is this likely to impact on India?
Yes, as you rightly have mentioned, India has its interest in Afghanistan, and it has invested about $3 billion, and it has worked to improve the infrastructure of Afghanistan itself, which has been acknowledged by the Taliban recently. The Taliban has recently acknowledged the fact that the Indian government has had developing projects in Afghanistan. And that's something which has to be highlighted, because although we have the right wing here, although we have the Hindutva movement here, but Indian government has been working to develop the infrastructure at Afghanistan, to have a goodwill relationship And in that sense, the legacy is hopefully to continue, provided the Taliban comes forward with an open hand. And as of now, Taliban is showing some positive gestures. We hope and pray that they are able to sail across in the right direction for a long, for a long period of time. It's not just for a year or two. It has to go for centuries together. With that goodwill in mind, if at all they extend their arms, then India would be very much happy to extend the arms, together. So I would say Indians have been good to Afghanistan right from a long time, because I can see a lot of people in India who are pursuing their education in India while they are from Afghanistan. The students are here; they're free to go and work as well. But the thing is that it all depends upon how we are able to express our thoughts. Yes, in today's time, there's so much of Islamophobia, there's so much of wrong notions about Muslims and people coming from abroad. But it all depends upon how well you are able to communicate to the people. It depends upon what kind of a gesture you make to make them, become cold and become warm towards you. Because they are going to be cold hearted if they are going to get carried away by the messages across, which is going to cause a lot of Islamophobic feelings. In fact, they are all xenophobic in nature. So what I want to say is that there are so much of negative energy across the world. We do acknowledge everything, but a lot can change if there is a positive gesture from either of the people who are involved. And that applies to Indians, that applies to the Pakistanis, and that applies to Afghans and all the people across the neighboring states. So India is hopefully having a diplomatic discussion now, and it has already been expressed in the media that India is willing to have a discussion with the Talibanis over the diplomatic measures to see to that there is no harm between the people. And Talibani spokesperson Zabiullah Mujahid right away, he said that he would not involve in the matters of India and he would not involve in the matters of Kashmir. And although he did not explicitly mention Kashmir, he said that he would not involve in the matters of India. So that gives us hope, because Kashmir is one issue which can be taken as a major issue for those people who are concerned. But we must remember it is a matter within the Indian territory. It is something which we need to sort it out from within. And if anybody from the external territory want to try to solve this, then that would create problems. And I would want to mention about what is happening to the Uyghurs at the moment, and the kind of relationship that which Pakistan is having with Chinese. We all know, as much as the separatist movement of India, that which you see in Kashmir, is also present in China amongst the Uyghurs, and we know they are kept in the rehabilitation centers, and they are going to get indoctrinated and all of that. Yet the Prime Minister of Pakistan, Imran Khan, wants to have good relation with Chinese, and that is the diplomatic measure. That is the level of political vision that one statesman should have to have a relationship with the bordering nation. So, with that in mind, if the Taliban can have relationship with Chinese, Taliban at the moment, they are in good books with the Chinese, and the Chinese are in good books with the Taliban. They are having peaceful coexistence, even when Uyghurs, the separatists, are a challenging issue to be dealt with. And when they can understand that, then they should also try to understand the issue within Indian territory with the Kashmiris. Yes, they are separatists. Yes, there are people who are having different views amongst themselves. There are people who are demanding for a separate state, and there are people who are very happy to be Indian, and there are people who want to be part of Pakistanis. All that, let them sort it out themselves. Do not interfere in our matters. And if you want to interfere, let it be in a form of diplomatic measure. And that will help us to have long-term relationship. As much as you want to have relationship with China, why don't you extend the same with India? That's my point that I want to leave it for the Talibanis at this point in time.
Yes, I see Dr. Shaida Wizarat. If you could unmute your mic, please. I know you want to obviously respond to what Umar Sharif has had to say, but also at the same time, just looking at China obviously having moved very, very swiftly to counter any US and NATO's objectives in Afghanistan. And that is the reason why we see the leaning of the Taliban more towards China, but also at the same time looking at the politics within Pakistan and how the politics in Pakistan, we know what had happened during the Musharraf era, we know what had happened during the time of Nawaz Sharif, but also with Imran Khan at this point in time, things seem to be different. And just looking at the type of relationship that Pakistan can enjoy with Afghanistan, and at the same time, in terms of even supporting the new Afghan government.
Certainly. But before I do that, I would like to respond to what the Indian delegate said with regard to Jammu and Kashmir. Jammu and Kashmir is not an internal problem of India. Jammu and Kashmir is on the United Nations Security Council resolutions. There are so many Security Council resolutions. It is not an internal problem of India. It is the unfinished agenda of the partition. And therefore, I would expect that India should have, that India does not, the Indian delegate is talking about the Taliban and Pakistan should show positive actions. I think it is India that is a country that has been for the last so many years, they have been doing a lot of cruel things against the people of Jammu and Kashmir. They have not given them the right of self-determination. And I think I'd be very happy if the Taliban take up this problem, because Kashmiris, people in Jammu, Kashmir and Ladakh have been oppressed for very long. And I think that it does make a lot of sense. You can't just keep telling the Taliban that, this is what they should do. They have to be positive. And what about India? India should try to be positive. India has been a very, very negative country. It has been persecuting its Muslim population. I have seen photographs of people going and cutting the limbs and arms and other body parts of Muslims just because they are Muslims. And I feel very surprised and I'm very disappointed if Muslims come on forums and support such a government that has been carrying on such cruelties against Muslims. And the people, Jammu and Kashmir is certainly not an internal issue of India. It is a problem on which the United Nations have passed resolutions. It is the unfinished agenda of the partition. So we have every right to go and help out our Kashmiri brothers and sisters. And I'm very surprised that the Indian delegate talks about the people in Xinjiang. Xinjiang, even whatever the situation is, but Xinjiang is a part of China. You can go and talk about internal affairs of the Chinese government, but with your own country, you don't look at the kind of situation that the poor people of Jammu and Kashmir are faced with. I'm very, very disappointed to hear that coming from a Muslim. Okay, with regard to Pakistan's relationship with the Taliban, I think that people in Pakistan feel very close to Afghanistan and to the Taliban, because Taliban have the integrity and the moral courage to bring about the kind of change that they have been wanting to. So I think that it's a very good opportunity. And for the last so many years, there were, this whole area was blocked because of the war in Afghanistan. And, for the last so many years, we've been wanting to develop relations with our eastern countries, for example, India and Nepal and Sri Lanka. And we established the SAARC Forum. But because of Indian hegemonic designs, we could not make much progress. And therefore, I have been suggesting in my articles that we should forget about the East. Instead of integrating with India, we should start integrating with Afghanistan and go on to Central Asia, and then Iran, Afghanistan, Turkey. So I would say that this is a very good opportunity for Pakistan to integrate westwards, because we can't go on waiting and expecting India to become a peaceful country, because I think the kind of government that we have in India, I think that they don't seem interested. So I think we should forget about integrating eastwards, and we should try and integrate westwards. And I think there are lots of opportunities for Pakistan and lots of opportunities for this whole region: China, Russia, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Iran, Turkey, along with Jammu and Kashmir. So I think this whole area can become very prosperous. And I think the government of Pakistan should also try and come up with some interesting, schemes on how to spread CPEC to Central Asian countries and to Afghanistan. So I think it's a wonderful opportunity that we are able to integrate westwards. And I think we should just forget about the Eastern Front, and we should just forget about India and just go on and form this block of countries, which are hopefully, which will become peaceful, and where there's going to be peace. And I hope that the spoilers to peace, countries like India and Israel and United States and UK, I hope that they are not able to prevail, and that we are going to be able to make sure that we contain all the, all the aggression that will be unleashed by these countries, because they haven't really come to terms with the Taliban coming into power. So I think that we need to come up with, our governments need to come up with interesting, solutions which will integrate this region and bring prosperity to this entire region.
Yes, Jazakallah for that. Salman, I'm going to get to you in a minute. I see Brother Umar Sharif has had his finger up. Quick response. I know you want to respond to something that Dr. Shahid has said.
Yeah. It's very interesting and very important for me to react. See, when I said we don't want Taliban to interfere in the issue of Kashmir, it was in the hope to maintain peaceful relationship between two nations. We're not saying that there hasn't been atrocities happening or recorded in Kashmir. There have been many atrocities against the Muslims of Kashmir, and there have been many things which has gone into the Human Rights Watch. We don't deny the fact, but the solutions has to be coming from our soil. We don't want people from outside to come and interfere in the internal matter if it is within the UN convention for them to interfere. Say, for instance, if there is a United Nations has got a say, let the United Nations come and talk. Let the United Nations do the talking, and don't replace that with the Taliban. And if at all, if you think that is going to work, then, as much as the Pakistan and Balochistan, if at all you have a problem, do you want Taliban to settle your problems there? I don't think so. I don't think you would want anybody from the external to come and tell you what you have to do in Pakistan. And you have all the right to rule your land in the way that you feel right. And similarly, I being an Indian, I being a Muslim, I differ with the ruling government now. But I must also say, as much as Taliban has said that they are very grateful for what Indian government has done to their land by investing a lot of money and for having built their infrastructure. And that is on records. That is on records. And very much to say that the Taliban spokesperson has said that he wants to have a peaceful relationship with India. And that's the positive gesture that which is required. And if you want to call India as a spoiler of peace, then I would say Pakistan has to introspect itself. You must introspect itself. We also want to, develop our nation within ourselves. I'm not saying that we don't have problems within our land. We have problem of the extremists among the Hindutva. Everything is there. But foreign policies has to be mended by both the nations. As much as I would want India to mend its policies, I also want the Pakistan also to extend warmthness. Without spreading peaceful words, you can't bring the lands and the opportunities together. If you are going to continue to call us as spoilers of peace, then I don't see anything positive to come in the coming days.
Yes, okay, Jazakallah for that. I actually want Salman Khan to come in and comment on this. And obviously, Salman, you've listened to both Umar Sharif and also Dr. Shahida Wizarat. Now, for someone like yourself, and I know you've been following developments in India for a very, very long time, you've been following the issue of Kashmir as well, and also looking at the Taliban. And do you think Taliban has a role or should play a role as far as Kashmir is concerned? Or do we have to say that, you know what, this is an Indian internal matter as far as India or Pakistan is concerned?
Okay, thank you very much. I've been listening to the very emotional debate between the Umar Sharif and the sister Shaida from Karachi, and they both have their own set narrative. Let me take it a logical. I want to give a logical answer here. All right, without being emotional. I want my brother Umar Sharif understand your position. You are an Indian Muslim. You are from India, and you have to say what you have to say and what you have to defend. What you have to defend. But let me put it out there certain fact, and I do not want this conversation to become Indian Pakistan battleground because we're supposed to be talking Taliban future. Now let me demystify a few things. But before I do that, I want to go back to the more straight point that brother Inayat just have made about the Taliban role in Kashmir. I don't think so. As much as the Kashmir liberation need to happen, I don't think so. The Taliban need to get involved in anything else but to build their own country. They have suffered for the 40 years. They have sacrificed their lives. They have sacrificed the generations into that. They have suffered enough. So for Taliban to look outwardly, I don't think so that I, as a Kashmiri human rights activist from South Africa, are like my brothers from Taliban, a Mujahideen from Taliban, or a government of the newly formed government of Islamic Emirates of Afghanistan to be involved in any international matter of conflict. Yes, solidarity and spirituality, we will ask them to make dua for us, but I think Taliban have suffered enough. They are pragmatic now. They need to build up their own country and they need to look after their own. Kashmir, let me answer to my brother Umar, and I want to detoxify the Indian narrative which has been played at the international media, at the power corridor of the United Nations, and at the diplomatic community. It's been for too long that people like international community have not understood that how the India have toxified the wrong and false narrative on Kashmir. And I will go into that step by step, if you allow me to. The first thing I want you to understand that Kashmir is definitely not an internal part. That will be the biggest miscalculation and uneducated statement anybody can make. It's a very emotional statement made by many Indians, and I heard from you as well. I understand your position. You are in India as a Muslim. You need to say what you need to say, but I understand. I hold nothing against you, but it's an Indian false narrative for the last 72 years that Kashmir is an internal part or atuta atang. No, it is completely. I'll tell you why. Because the Indian claim to be in the territory of independent or the princely state of Kashmir was based on the first thing, the instrument of accession. The instrument of accession in 1947 on the 26th of October was signed by the Maharaja. That is false. Why? Because that instrument of accession, India still has to produce in any international court of justice. And I got the copy of it, and India got the copy of it, but they want to hide it because that is not a legal document, because it has been a fill in the blanks. I can even put it out there if you want me to in front of you, and I'll show you that is not a legal. And brother, our legal fraternity sitting here, brother Zaid, will say, no, this is not. The August was cut off and written October. So that is not the document. When Nehru realized that that instrument of accession is false and bogus, then what he done is straight away he ran to United Nations, and he thought the United Nations to internationalize it, because India always said it is a bilateral issue. We don't want to make any third party. How come you can say that? Because it was a Nehru who took it, the issue of Indian invasion or Indian illegal occupation of Kashmir into United Nations. It wasn't Pakistan. It was not Kashmiris. It was Nehru who think that the United Nations will say it is your territory, take it. United Nations listened to the both parties and declare the Article 47 of 1948, which says neither the India nor the Pakistan is a rightful owner of the land of Kashmiri issue of the fate of the Kashmiris must be decided through the fair plebiscite. Do you disagree with me, my dear brother Umar Sharif, that India signed that agreement? They did sign the agreement, and Jinnah signed, Nehru signed on that agreement that the issue of the Kashmir will be resolved by the free and fair plebiscite. But in 1954, they delayed that plebiscite by the false allegation that the scouts in Pakistan interfering into that, and they delayed it and they changed and they brought the amendment called 370, which they revoked it last year. They say you don't need an election, you don't need a referendum. What you need is a semi-autonomous status, and that's Article 35, Article 30, 370, 35A. A lot of people, they don't ask what after the A is. B, C, D. Whole the alphabet. India have got the composition of the 567 incorporated state which was illegally incorporated into the India, and the A, B, C, D of the article dealing with Assam, dealing with the Junagadh, dealing with the Hyderabad. They were all independent state with the Muslim majority area. They did not want to be with the India, and India said, no, I will give you the autonomous status. You rather stay with us than to be with Pakistan. And they incorporated forcefully and fraudulently. Now, that the issue of Indian internal issue, Kashmir is internal issue, it is completely false. It is an educated calculation. It is a false propaganda, internationally accepted by the international law, by the United Nations, and that's why the India has been asked to revoke again the Article 370. Now, I want to come back to the point of what the brother and everybody said. India have done such a huge investment of over 3 billion US dollar instead of investing into their own social welfare and medical facilities to uplift 10 million people sleeping in a gutters in India. Why India went to invest so heavily? Because the only thing they want to have the depth of the India into the western body of Pakistan. India invested the thing with a 400 project in Adbai. They have 400 projects in Afghanistan. Only population of Indians nation living in Afghanistan is 3,000, and they had 27 consulates. Now in South Africa, we got 3.5 million Indian living. We have only 3 consulate general: Johannesburg, Cape Town, and Durban. So it was a platform was built by the India to replace Americans so they can base there and become a super regional power, and then block the water coming into Pakistan from a Salma dam. And of course, fighting the proxy war. My brother is saying the Balochistan, India created the BLA, the MQM and the BLA, the Balochistan Liberation Army. It was launching attacks from Afghanistan into Pakistan, and there are ample proof of it. So now India is the biggest loser in this new Taliban dispensation. Taliban is saying we are pragmatic. We no longer have a bad relationship with India, Pakistan, or anybody else. But people need to understand that India was setting up the proxy war basis, and it has been Kulbush Yadin, one of the spy, was caught in Balochistan. He got from the Afghanistan into the Iran and from Iran to that, and his work was to sabotage the peace in the Balochistan. So the Chinese investment can be redundant and cannot be. So the people think that the whole world is so dumb and stupid. They don't see the Indian motive to be there because they wanted to replace the Americans, and they say we will be holding Afghanistan as your arm, and you don't have to be here. But when the things turn against them, they have to leave overnight and leave all the investment. So India wasn't there to build Afghanistan. It was there to destroy Pakistan. And that is where I want to end up my narrative. We can have another show purely onto the Kashmir, and I can prove any Indian scholar. I want them to come, not only the brother Umar, because he is a Muslim. I don't think so it will be fair for me to talk to him and get upset about it. I think let get Indian ambassador, let get the Indian foreign minister, and I will prove him that Kashmir is belong to Kashmiri. It is an independent state. And I can tell you now, let me say something, and I want you to please record this word. If India did not remove its force 900,000, India is heading exactly the same way the Afghanistan was become the black hole, economic black hole of a Russian Republic, and Russian Republic break down because of the Afghanistan illegal occupation, and India will be heading exactly the same way. If they do not remove their forces, 900,000, it is not a joke. They will be disintegrated into the 27 to 30 state, and maybe not, and reduced to the, like USS reduced to the Kabul, to the Moscow. India will be reduced in a few years to 27 state, and maybe they will be on a New Delhi. There will be a small flag of India, because India will never be able to sustain its illegal occupation in Kashmir, and Kashmir and Srinagar will become a Kabul of like the USSR. Thank you.
Jazakallah for that, Attorney Ziad Patel. Obviously you've been listening, and while these discussions and these debates have been going on, but again, the key issue here is, whether we like it or not, the Taliban is in power, and we've seen the signs, we've seen the signals, we've seen basically a new breed of Taliban. Gone are the days that we saw those in 1996 to 2001. We see them, a lot more refined. We've seen, the press conferences that obviously you've seen. We've seen how they interact with journalists, and also, people call them the ragtag army. And what we've seen, the special forces, the Badri 313 unit, 5,000 units, sophisticated in terms of, being a special force, looking like a special force, looking at the equipment that they carry. So definitely we are seeing a new breed of Taliban. The key issue here is to look at the Muslim world. And when we talk about the Muslim world, we know Saudi Arabia has assumed the so-called leadership of the Muslim world, and just trying to understand what level of support, should the Muslim world be giving to the Taliban as they try and go through this entire rebuilding process.
Shukran, Brother Inayat. I just want to make one or two short comments on the discussion with regard to India and Jammu and Kashmir and the occupation and so forth. I think what's important for us to understand is that there is a geopolitical conflict, but there are also, UN resolutions, and there's also a background to this conflict. And what is important for us to know is that whenever there's an occupation by a military force, and that constitutes a belligerent occupation of another's land, there's always going to be a consequence of gross violations of human rights. It's incontrovertible that India perpetrates gross violations of human rights in that area, in the ongoing occupation of Kashmir. And I think if we stand with Palestinians, we stand with Afghanistan, and if we fundamentally stand with the respect and promotion of human rights, we must never be duplicitous in our approach. And I think from the perspective of Afghanistan now coming out of a 40-year war, first was the Russians, then it was a short rule by the Taliban of the 90s, and then the US invasion and occupation. Afghanistan has its own problems, and I think imperative for now that the Taliban, as they've been, stating in the media, that they want the consent and they want the consensus of the international community. They want international community approval. They want to become a recognized state. They've made clear that, part of that state is going to be the Sharia law. We're going to have to understand what is their interpretation of Sharia. Certainly cannot be what it was in the past. And that we need to give all forms of support to the new Taliban government. It's very clear that the Taliban have won the war in Afghanistan. They've won the war. Even in the European Union, leaders are saying that they have conceded in having lost the war in Afghanistan. So the Taliban are the victors, and the US imperial invaders are the vanquished. And that is a fact on the ground that needs to be understood by everyone in understanding this geopolitical situation that's unfolding. I think from a perspective of Muslims globally and defenders of human rights, we need to be persisting in pushing the agenda of human rights in Afghanistan, to hold the Taliban accountable for their promises. And I make reference to this in an article that I wrote recently called "The Taliban Victory Over the US Reclaims an important protection under international law, the right of self-determination. And I think this even goes to the discussion earlier amongst the speakers here, that all people have the right to self-determination. By virtue of that right, they freely determine their political status and freely pursue their economic, social, and cultural development. Coming back to stating that Western culture and Western standards is not the epitome that the rest of the world needs to meet up to. That is a false narrative. And it's a narrative that has been very interestingly, intricately woven into the media and into, the kind of streams of culture and TV and television that people get associated to say that, look, the American culture is the right culture, or the culture of Europeans is the right culture. But Muslims and people of the Middle East and Central Asia certainly have their own ethnicity and their own culture, and they must be comfortable with that culture, and they must be able to explore that culture, and they must be able to advance their own society and become a recognized and acceptable member of the international community. I recall, when Nelson Mandela spoke, if I'm not mistaken, if it was at the inauguration, and once, one of his words was to say that, we've come out of this darkness, this hole of apartheid, and that, South Africans must take their rightful place with their heads up high and in the international community, and take their space in that international community. And I think that's fundamentally important for Afghans, for Kashmiris, and for all oppressed people. I mean, an important aspect is the Chinese Uyghurs, who are also being suppressed in those concentration camps. And if we speak up for justice on one cause, never can we push down the legitimate rights and aspirations of other people that are being severely oppressed in other parts of the world. Brother Inayat, to speak about Saudi Arabia, I must be honest with you, they are an extremely disappointing example of what Muslims should be upholding towards. They certainly are not the leaders of the Muslim world. I do not consider the Saudis in any way whatsoever as the leaders of the Muslim world. They have shamelessly sided, what we call the axis of evil with the United States and the Zionist Israel. And for many years now, the Saudi government, together with the Emiratis and other Arab nations, have been normalizing relations with Israel and with the United States. And in this normalization process, they've actually now condoned the human rights violations and atrocities that are continuing to be perpetrated on the Palestinian people on a daily basis. And again, America's interest in the UK and the European interest in the Middle East only goes insofar as their national interest and regional interest in that area need to be protected. So this is the example of the Americans in their imperial agenda, is that they will do everything in their power to balkanize Middle Eastern states into smaller components that they're able to manipulate and impose their own government. That's exactly what happened with Hamid Karzai in Afghanistan. They chose a Pashtun from Pakistan. He didn't have great support, and they imposed this government in Pakistan. But this was actually a false government. It wasn't a government representative of all the people of Pakistan. And yet we had the Taliban and Afghani people fighting for their right to exist and their right to determine their own future since the 2001 invasion in Afghanistan. We see the same situation that has been perpetrated in Iraq. And then, like I said, the other component is the kind of belligerent military occupation that these forces impose in those areas, in the use of, depleted uranium, for instance, and what that does on the environment and children born with birth defects and so forth. We talk about the use of white phosphorus and, the drone program, nail bombs and so forth that's perpetrated in Gaza. When Israel carries out its attacks against Hamas, for instance, they go in, they attack the entire building. They give limited or no warning whatsoever that the building is going to come under attack, under specific terror, under specific attack. and then without indiscriminate bombing and without distinction perpetrate war crimes. I mean, just making reference again to one of the articles, the US launched more than 13,000 drone strikes in Afghanistan between 2015 and 2020. Let's just put that in perspective, 13,000 drone strikes, killing up to 10,000 people. According to statistics kept by the Bureau of Investigative Journalism, the CIA, relying on cell phone numbers to find, fix, and finish its alleged enemies, often launched its Hellfire missiles at the wrong targets or at targets standing amid groups of civilians. Along with drone strikes came 9 raids in which US and Afghan forces would burst into a home in the middle of the night and kill or capture those inside, breeding further resentment. The raids were so deeply unpopular that they sometimes led an entire village to switch its allegiance to the Taliban. What was worse, the US military and the CIA failed for years to fully grasp the degree to which their airstrikes and night raids were being manipulated by Afghans who fed them false information to convince the Americans to launch raids against their local rivals, or those rivals carted off to Guantanamo Bay. So what was happening was that you also had in Afghanistan this situation of warlords and drug lords. And, you know, the CIA, in fact, continued this perpetration of this kind of toxic behavior. And in fact, you know, the reading and the research is that by continuing and allowing this kind of behavior, the kind of heroin and opium trade, in fact, doubled from the time of the invasion of Afghanistan to prior to when the Taliban were in control. And again, this is the kind of Ashraf Ghani government that was imposed in Afghanistan that permeated the systemic culture of corruption and nepotism at all spheres of government. And this again caused a huge failure in the Afghan government. For instance, and I think this was shown when the US, even through its own intelligence, never thought and never could have foreseen that the rapid rate of advancement of the Taliban from rural areas of Afghanistan and to the villages and towns that they were occupying, that would get to the gates of Kabul in such short period of time. Just to make your listeners and viewers aware, the duplicity of the American and imperial forces are so clear in the way the intelligence agencies would play one force against another. You know, very importantly, in 2020, when Trump met with the Taliban, yet the Americans had imposed an Afghan government. But when they met in Doha with the Taliban, they met with the Taliban without the Afghan government being involved. And from last year, from 2020, the US had realized that they had already been losing the war in Afghanistan. They needed to start getting safe passage of their troops out of Afghanistan, and had signed this deal which Biden as a successor was going to take over in any event. But yet, through their own rhetoric and through their own media streams, what came out very clear is that they were willing to prop up and continue with Ashraf Ghani and the 300,000 so forth forces that would fight against the Taliban, yet enter into a backdoor deal. This is the same situation in the creation of ISIS or ISIS-K or any of these other terror organizations which they so call as a threat to their own existence. And this is the play out of intelligence agencies. This is what has happened in Iraq, in the occupation of Iraq, for instance, as well. We have to know also and place into context that even Al-Qaeda at one stage, worked with CIA intelligence when they fought against the Russians. And this is actually, bad decisions, bad foreign policy, duplicitous intelligence agencies playing one against the other. And I call it provocateering that continues to destabilize, the Middle East, Central Asia, and, these countries. And I think the future that's important for us is to, hold this Taliban government, that they want to form an inclusive government. This inclusivity should mean multi-ethnicity. It must respect fundamental human rights. And coming back to the Sharia is very clear. We could see this, this unfolded in the time of when ISIS was taking over major parts of land in Iraq, and the Yazidis were being trapped and executed, that this is not the way of Islam, and this is not the way that Islam would deal with prisoners' rights and the rights of women and the rights of those that need to be protected. In fact, Islam is very clear in the Islamic jurisprudence on the sacrosanct that human life is sacrosanct. Fundamentally, the right to life, as we would call it, is sacrosanct, and Islam recognizes this right. So we need to continue to push this important international community agenda on the Afghanistan, that they need to rebuild after 40 years. They need to be supported, and that US imperial and invading forces need to stay out of their politics, and be able to create their own inclusive government with the right of self-determination. I think what is also interesting is that Afghanistan has allies of Russia, China, and noting that the UN Security Council resolution, and this again is duplicity in all its forms, is that we would never get UN security resolutions against the US and United States atrocities in terms of its drone strikes program, or for instance, the Australians that we've just seen, the Australian government and their military and their involvement in unlawful killing of Afghanistan and this is, or drone strikes. For instance, you have, some of these, some people that have testified to the kind of atrocities by military intelligence would say that, it's a sort of, they far away and far away from the actual action, but it's sort of sanctified in the way they just, commit this drone strike and go and have lunch with their family. Only later do some realize the kind of impact of the kind of work that they're committing. So I think, just to finish off on this point, I don't think the Saudi government and the Saudis are an example to what is unfolding. Also important that in the UN Security Council resolution, China and Russia have abstained, and that I think was a clear signal to the Taliban government, if they're going to consider them as an ally, that they need to play up to a certain standard of upholding human rights and being an important, respectful member in the international community. This does not mean that China is an upholder of human rights. I want to make that clear. They are involved in their own atrocities, in their own oppression of people and the Muslim populations. But I think also there's a geopolitical agenda out there, and considering the kind of insurgency, even from South Africans that went to go and serve in Afghanistan through, states, through security service agencies. They're violating South African laws. For instance, the foreign military regulation of the Foreign Military Assistance Act. This is the same thing that's happening where young Zionist Jews go and serve in the IDF in Israel. So they need to be held accountable, and that from the perspective of lawfare, we cannot only, expect the international community through the United Nations or through the International Criminal Court or the UN Security Council setting up special forums to hold these criminals accountable, but through strengthening our own national jurisdictions, through lawfare and universal jurisdiction to hold through our own laws these crimes that are perpetrated with impunity, which we call hostis humanis generis, crimes committed against the whole of humankind.
Jazakallah for that, Ziad. Yes, Umar Sharif. I think we've got about half an hour to go. And, it's just amazing how time has actually flown in the last hour and a half. Umar Sharif, just looking at the Taliban, where they are at this point in time, and obviously we know that we've been talking about a new breed of Taliban, and, we've seen it from the actions in terms of how they've responded. Just looking at the government, what is expected of this government at this point in time? Obviously, we're talking about development, but also there's been a massive humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan. We know about poverty. We speak about, orphans, widows, and the country obviously has been devastated. And to add insult to injury, what the Americans did is when they left yesterday, and we've seen it very, very clearly, how they had basically destroyed the airport. They destroyed the planes. They did all of that just to be spiteful. And to add to that, we saw another drone attack where we saw about 10 people that were killed, that many say the Americans have once again been involved. So without America looking at the Taliban, what are the priorities?
Well, keeping the discussion to be focused on Taliban, we have discussed a lot about India and a lot about Saudi Arabia and a lot about Kashmir, and so many things are just left halfway. Anyways, we'll not get into that. Before getting into your question, I just want to make one point and quickly move across. One of the things that I want to say that no government at this point in time is distinguished like black or white. There are many shades of gray in between. There are so many areas where many government, I can name any government in this world, they have their own shortcomings, they have their own violation of law, they have violated human rights, and all of these things can be, listed, and it can go at length. But keeping all in its own context, what do we want to expect from the neighboring states is that let us manage our problems from within, and let us also try to have peaceful coexistence with the territories which are neighboring to our land. That is primarily required because we don't want to have any more wars. That is what I want to say. And if we have problems of human violations and many other things, let us go through the international court process, and let us go through the diplomatic means. Let us have diplomatic means, and through the diplomatic relationship, we can go far and we can go towards prosperity. That's my disclaimer for now. And after that, I'll take your question, which you have posed. What should be Taliban be focusing on? Yes, they are focusing more on peaceful relationship at this point in time, because what I can see in the second coming of Taliban is something different. They have said they would give public amnesty to all whoever is there, and they don't want to punish anyone. They want to give peace to everybody, and they have already opened schools for the women there, and women are going and pursuing education. And I have seen myself in today's BBC's broadcast where women were shown educated, and they are also pursuing education while they are in hijab, and that is a new thing that which is which is being witnessed now. And they are talking about progress, they are talking about development. I'm told that even drinking water is a big concern in Afghanistan. In Afghanistan, there is a dearth of drinking water because it's not managed well, and they have to put in a lot of effort through education, through planning, through building up infrastructure, and that should be their focus. Their focus has to be that. And all the people, whoever, I'm talking about everybody for that matter, all the neighboring territories, let them be more focused about their lands and their development and their concern, what is immediately for which they are questionable. And if we are going to work on our own selves and at the same time extend our hands with the neighboring territories, then we can have peace in the borders. If not, what happens is that we are so busy to be holding guns at each other, and we are not able to take care of our own lands. We are not able to take care of drinking water. We are not able to build infrastructure. We are not able to build government institutions. Why? Because we are busy in spying each other, and we are busy in holding guns at each other. We should manage our places wisely, judiciously, and prudently. And if with that, if you're going to have a strong relationship with the bordering territories, it can work well. And before that, before I end up, I have to say one very important thing to the speaker before, Mr. Salman Khan. He was very strongly intending to say that India would break into many parts and it will just diminish it to a very small flag, and all of that statements were mentioned. What I want to correct him with is, if he is really concerned about having an independent Kashmir, work on that, take your paper and pen, go to the international court, work towards all the possible ways. And if you're going to pick up guns or you're going to instigate anybody to pick up guns, then the guns will answer the guns. Let us not go to that. Let us go to intellectual discussion. And if you're talking about breaking India into many parts, I don't see what is the wise conclusion out of that. If at all you are interested to get an independent land for Kashmir, I would say it's your wish and your will. But we in India, I being part of Tamil Nadu and Karnataka and various parts within South India and North India, people are happy to be living as Indians. What is the problem with you? I mean, if you want to have a separate Kashmir state and you are successful, well, it's your job. You can go ahead. But why are you so interested in breaking our lands? What is that? What is that mission that you
Yes.
have in breaking? You understand what I'm
Okay.
saying? There,
I
there
think we
is a
just
lot of
obviously we are. I'm going to stop you. I think we are diverting, and because of the time, I think time is of the essence. And we are not going to focus on India and the breakup of India a lot. I know the statements were made. I think you've made your point. We take your point, Umar Sharif, as well. But I want to bring Dr. Shahida Wizarat now. Dr. Shahida Wizarat, we're talking about development, and obviously you come from that background. You come from a very, very strong economic background, and you understand global economics, and you've seen what has happened with Pakistan, its relationship with China, and in all indication, it appears as if the Taliban is going to have a strong relationship with China. We know about the Belt Road Initiative and the like, and China has got a lot of plans in the pipeline for the region. And just how do you see the development of Afghanistan? And again, the point I want to make, and the point I made earlier, that the Americans' actions right at the end shows that we cannot rely on the United States of America to get Afghanistan to move forward from a development perspective.
Certainly. I think Afghanistan has been exploited a lot for the last 20 years. For example, some of my colleagues who went to Afghanistan, they were consultants there, and they came back and told us that there were planes parked, and those planes were being filled up with lithium and uranium, which was being taken out of the country. And um, an Afghan minister was visiting the institute where I work, and I asked him, I said that, it's very disappointing that you are allowing the Americans to take out lithium and uranium, and this belongs to the people of Afghanistan. So why are you allowing, they have put you in power, so that doesn't mean that you should allow the Americans to take out all the lithium and uranium. And he said something very interesting. He thought for a minute, and then he said that actually it's not the Americans, it's the UK that is taking out the uranium and the lithium. So he didn't refute what I had said. So for the last 20 years, Afghanistan has been exploited a lot. Its natural resources are being taken out. So I think I have written a few articles on Afghanistan and its development. And I have because I also work on natural resources, conflict and growth. And I find that Afghanistan is very rich in natural resources. They say that there is about $1 trillion worth of natural resources inside Afghanistan. And I just feel that I think that what Afghanistan should do, the Taliban government should do, they should try and have some sort of agreement with the Russian Federation and with the Chinese People's Republic of China. And those agreements should try, and they should ensure that raw material, that natural resources are not taken out in raw form. Because countries that have exported their natural resources in raw form, they have suffered from the resource curse. And therefore, I have suggested to the Taliban government that they should have some agreement with China and Russia, and they should ensure that instead of exporting them in raw form, China and Russia should help them to establish industries which will use these natural resources. Now, obviously, some of them will be quite easy. For example, there is a lot of lapis lazuli and a lot of precious stones and gold and silver, etc. So, obviously, they can establish, but there are some like lithium, and there is uranium, and there is copper and gold and all sorts of natural resources. Now, they will have to establish a dynamic comparative advantage for that, because a lot of those will require very sophisticated industries, which at the moment Afghanistan doesn't have. So I think Afghanistan should also try and establish such a collaboration with Turkey, with Iran, Pakistan, China, Russia, and all these countries which can help Afghanistan to in the industrial uses of these natural resources. That is one thing I wanted to say. The other thing is with regard to their agriculture. China, this Afghanistan is very rich in agriculture also. They grow a lot of fruits and they grow wheat and all kinds of agricultural products. And also, there are countries in Central Asia and also the Russian Federation that have banned genetically modified food. So I think I would suggest to the Taliban government that they should also try and come up with, this organic agriculture, because they're going to find a very big market in the Russian Federation and some Central Asian countries. So I think there is a great potential in Afghanistan. It's very rich in natural resources. But again, I would say that Afghanistan should not allow the export of natural resources in raw form, because that is how countries have been suffering. I mean, doing the
Yes, I
course,
think
they have to make
yes,
themselves
Dr. Shaida.
strong.
Okay, yes, we've got you back. You broke up there for a minute or so,
Thank
Dr.
you.
Shaida.
One point I wanted to make earlier with regard to this Islam, differentiate between Sharia laws and cultural values. I find that in the subcontinent, Muslims in the subcontinent, Pakistan, India, and also Afghanistan and some parts of, like KPK, the problem is that we are not able to distinguish between cultural values and religious values. For example, the previous Afghan government, Taliban government, they were very much against education of women. But if you read the Quran, there's a lot of emphasis on education of women as well as men. So that was because the cultural values were such that culture in Afghanistan and KPK, that was against the education of women. So that got mixed up with religious values. But I'm very happy to note that the present Afghan government, the Taliban government, have said that they are not going to be following those prescriptions. And for example, similarly, if you look at India and Pakistan, you find that there are Muslims which are very, very religious and they are prepared to lay down their lives for Islam, but they are not prepared to share their inheritance with female family members. I've seen this in India and I've seen this in Pakistan also. So that is again because Muslims lived in India for so long that they got influenced by Hindu inheritance laws. And because Hindus disinherit the female members of the family, so a lot of Muslims who claim to be very, very pious and very, very committed and they love Islam, but they follow the Hindu traditions of inheritance. And that is why I think that we need to distinguish between inheritance law, between cultural values and religious values. And the other thing that I wanted to suggest to the Taliban is that any country which brings Islamic, which says that it wants to Islamize, the first thing that they bring are the punishments. I think that we have to get the sequence right. We should not, the Taliban should not go for bringing in Islamic punishments first. First of all, Islam gives a lot of importance to masawat. And, like you remember Hazrat Umar's time, when Hazrat Umar was very keen that even the stray dog should not go hungry. And that, there was so much emphasis on equality and so much emphasis on brotherhood and taking care of your neighbors, etc. So I think what the Taliban should do is that they should first bring in Islamic masawat and establish a society where nobody goes hungry, where women get educated and they can work, and there is complete transparency. People can get up and ask the ruler questions about his, belongings and about his whatever personal belongings. And I think once they have created such a society, then obviously they will not allow
Yes, I think we've lost Dr. Shaida. We've got about 15 minutes to go. And Salman, I'm going to start off with you. And obviously, as we wind down, possibly just to give you about about 3 minutes or so, just to get some final thoughts on what we have been discussing, and also looking at the way forward for the Taliban from here onwards.
Jazakallah khair. I think 3 minute or 3 minute and a half. First of all, I like to break the news on your channel. Our stalwart, the Mujahid Islam, the Kashmir, one of the greatest leader, Sayyid Shah Ali Jinali, just have passed away. Inna Allahi wa inna
Inna
Allahi
lillah.
ilayhi raji'un. May Allah Ta'ala grant him the highest darjat, maghfirat to him. He just has
Ameen.
passed away, just as we're talking. Anyway, I think I just want to touch base on a few points. I don't want to go into the explanation, but I want to I think our attorney, our brother, comrade Ziad Patel has, mentioned about the Universal Declaration of the Human Right, ISSPR, and United Nations role in Afghanistan, the resolutions, whether it is in Kashmir or whether it is in Afghanistan. I think we need to understand something very important. We need to detox. We need to decolonize the United Nations. United Nations is very Eurocentric, and it is vanguard of the Western agenda in United Nations. They got a duplicity of the application of the UDHR and ISSPR. When they want to punish Saddam Hussein, they use a human right declaration, and they brought the 7 resolution in one settings, and they destroy Afghanistan. They destroyed the what you call it, Saddam Hussein, the Libya. Only 12 people was killed by the Gaddafi, and they destroyed the whole of the Libya. But when over 100,000 people have been brutally killed in Kashmir, there is no resolution has been passed. So we need to understand the United Nations cannot serve the purpose when it's come to the Muslim, because it's very anti-Muslim and it is very anti-African. Because when Umar al-Bashir of Sudan was committing the war crime, he was asked for International Court of Justice to be tried. But when other people have done, George Bush and Tony Blair and Putin, they would never been arrested because of the United Nations protect them. What we need to see going forward with the Taliban, as you can, Talibans are very new. I would say very refreshing to see the Taliban emerge as a very, very balanced outfit. They are more of a political, outfit than the militant outfit, and we need to help across the world, not only the Muslim, from every part of the world, for their rebuild rehabilitation program. I would urge our South Africa. I have written already to the President Cyril Ramaphosa to help set up a TRC, Truth and Reconciliation Commission, in under the auspices of South African government, DIRCO, to see how we can show them that we heal our past from the apartheid government, and how we can help them. Now, the Doha Accord and Washington, at the time of the Russian and the American, they make a deal in Washington and left Pakistan out, and they say Russian want to withdraw. Then Pakistan was not invited to the Washington in 1988, and then that was a one accord. Exactly same thing happened after 40 years or 30 years. That Doha Accord happened without the Afghan government. So that's American way of doing things. I also must emphasize that Ahmed Karzai was also the class fellow and also the working colleague with the Condoleezza Rice, and they were there because they both worked for Caltex and then Anacol, and they were over. Both of them was instilled into the government by the George Bush to look after the oil affairs. Now, I just want to brief my, very important, because my brother has said, what his name is, Umar Sharif, that we must go to the International Court of Justice. I just want to inform him that from this land, for his information, we have brought the war case crime in 2017 against the Prime Minister Modi, and it is going to IGC, and that's a registered case. In South Africa, the warrant of arrest was issued, and it is still there. I want to retract and also want to qualify my statement about the India to be disintegrate. I'm not saying that we want to disintegrate. I'm giving the analogy that if the India continue to be there as illegal occupying forces like the Russian were, I was giving an analogy. I want you to please understand unemotionally. My analogy is that India must also understand that no ruler, no empire have ever been successful to rule against the will of the people on the land. And India must learn to understand that we don't want to see India to be disintegrated. It's our brother country, it is our neighbor country, but they must not be continue their illegal occupation in Kashmir. But if they don't, the end
Yes,
result will be that Russian have a
Salman.
breakdown and
Yes,
disintegrated. So I wanted to
Maaf.
retract my statement, and I want to qualify that. I was saying, I was giving an analogy, not saying that India must be destroyed or disintegrated. I was saying if they don't do it, this is the end result is going to be.
Jazakallah for that, Salman. Yes, I know. I'm sorry I had to push you, but we are running out of time. We've got about 10 minutes, and I said, we're going to wind down. 3 minutes, Attorney Ziad Patel. Final thoughts?
Yes, just again on these two articles that I've based some of our discussion today, I wanted to talk about the CIA's backing in the new president. That was Karzai when he made his younger brother, Ahmad Wali Karzai, the de facto viceroy of Kandahar in southern Afghanistan, and the boss of the massive Afghan heroin trade. Ahmad Wali Karzai's power over the heroin business meant that when tractor trailers loaded with drugs were stopped by local security forces, he could call their commanders to order the release of the trucks and their contents. Just taking into example the opium and heroin trade in Afghanistan and how that was manipulated by the CIA and the US at that time. Afghanistan's opium production soared in 2002 and just kept growing. By 2020, 224,000 hectares of land were under opium poppy cultivation in Afghanistan, compared with 123,000 hectares in 2010, according to the United Nations. And this again is from this report that I'm speaking about, which is called a War's Epitaph. For 2 decades, Americans told one lie after another about what they were doing in Afghanistan. And that, again, dissolves the other narrative that the Taliban were, drug dealers and warlords. But in fact, the facts of it are that, in fact, the trade increased multifold during the US occupation of Afghanistan. I also want to speak to Dr. Shaida Wazirat, who made some important statements. I'm also involved in mining law and so forth. And this is a continuous problem with South Africa. South Africa is a huge reserves in coal and gold mining. And again, this is the challenge that the developing countries have with South Africa still having the infrastructure in place, is that we still have the difficulty of beneficiating our human resources and our minerals. And yet we will then sell it to first world countries and to Israel for the beneficiation process. And I think that's what you're speaking about, is the beneficiation of those minerals, that Afghanistan is rich in mineral resources. And that's the very reason, together with the drug trade, that the Americans are involved in Afghanistan, is that we need to, like your other speaker, Umar Sharif, has spoken about, is to start getting peaceful coexistence amongst Afghanistani neighbors and start developing those important peaceful coexistence and relationship amongst nation states. We know that during the Afghan rule by, Hamid Karzai under US occupation, that also the Silk trade route between Iran and Afghanistan was closed. And again, that Silk trade route is reopening, with also oil resources now starting to flow between Iran and Afghanistan on the Afghanistani western border. So it's imperative that, number one, that Afghanistan forms an inclusive government, as I've mentioned earlier, considering the cultural ethnicities of the various people and cultures in that society, that fundamental human rights are respected. And once again, those fundamental human rights do not have to be the norms of the United Nations or according to Western standards, that Islam is rich and enrichful in terms of the prophetic model and the Islamic jurisprudence to respect fundamental human rights and to have peaceful coexistence with its neighbors. And to create a constitutional government structure and system that creates political stability in Afghanistan. I think it's important that the Taliban bring security so that we don't have the kind of insurgency and incursions that we've had in the past, in order for that region to grow. My advice would also be for people, or the Tajik leaders, Ahmed Massoud and Amrullah Saleh, Saleh was the vice president previously that have went into the Tajik mountains to formulate the resistance against Afghanistan. My hope is that, all resistance of Afghanistan comes together with the Taliban leadership to create an inclusive government, that works for the people and is able to put forthright the standpoint of the right of self-determination and fundamental respect for everybody's rights, so that that region can start developing and coexisting in peaceful relations.
Jazakallah so much for that, Ziad. Umar Sharif.
Yeah, I want to just express my thoughts with regards to Sharia. First and foremost, as a student of knowledge, I have to express that the goals of Sharia is very important, and which is widely understood as maqasidu Sharia, the objectives of Sharia. And this is a very important aspect that we have to be drawing towards, that the Sharia has come to fundamentally preserve the deen. It has come to preserve the lives. It has come to preserve mal, the property, and nasl, the lineage, and akal, the intellect. So all of these things have to be preserved under Sharia, maqasidu Sharia. And amongst that, there are three categories. And first of the category is the daruriyat, that is the basic necessities that we talk about: food, shelter, and place to live. And then goes to hajiyat, the needs of people. They want to get married, they want to find jobs, they want to have a place for, they have some basic necessities are met. And then goes to tahsiniyat, it goes to luxuries. And if you want to go by step, then we need to have a very strong plan, be it people in Afghanistan or Pakistan or India. Everybody needs to plan to reach up to tahsiniyat. So only when we go to a level where we are strong, with the foundations, with the values, and with the commerce and trade, then we can become a powerful nation, and we can become a people who can be proud of. We always talk about, Islam is so beautiful, Islam is so powerful, Islam has got the best of things, is here and there. But when we look into the state of the affairs at this point in time, we all have our own challenges. So going back to the roots of Sharia, let's talk about maqasidu Sharia, and let us remind ourselves of our importance towards preserving lives and preserving our properties, inshallah ta'ala.
Inshallah, Jazakallah khairan. Yes, Dr. Shaida, we've got the last 3 minutes dedicated to you.
Thank you very much. I think that it was a very good opportunity for us to give all these advices, and I think we are giving these advices in very good spirit, because we want Afghanistan to be successful. But I find it very strange that even, governments that are the worst violators of human rights, they have been persecuting their minorities. They have been literally chopping off their body parts. They are telling the Taliban, they are lecturing Taliban on human rights. Now, I find that very absurd. I mean, everybody is out there to tell Taliban that they shouldn't do this, they shouldn't do that, they must do this, but they must not do that. But if you look at the record of these countries, these governments, they are the worst violators of human rights. And they never look into their own, they should look at their own activities and their own performance. And for example, India has been telling the Taliban that Taliban should not do this and that, although for the last 20 years, India has been using Afghan soil against Pakistan. They built 7 consulates, and those 7 consulates were being used to do terrorism in Balochistan. And India is way ahead of everybody to tell Taliban that they should not do terrorism and they should not do that. So I think that Taliban should just try and do the right thing. They should try and listen to the advice of people who are really sincerely giving them advice, but they should not let these countries which have been conducting a lot of terrorist activities, they should not let them bully them, and they should not pay too much attention to them, because the Taliban know what they want to do. They have come with a certain agenda, and I think it's very good that they are giving out very positive signals that they are going to carry on and they are going to ensure women's rights, etc. And I would just say that once again, that they must establish an Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. But first, they should go for establishing Masawat, and they should also ensure that their resources are not looted like they have been looted for the last 20 years. And once they have established, and I want to add that Afghanistan should establish a very strong relationship with some powers in the region, strong powers like China and Russia. They should have a very friendly relationship. They should not have the kind of relationship that a lot of countries have, like a master and a slave type of relationship. They must have a very strong, friendly relationship, but that relationship should ensure that Afghanistan is not attacked, because Afghanistan has already lost 40 years. For the last 40 years, Afghanistan has been fighting wars, and Afghan civilians have been getting killed. So I would again suggest that they should have a strong military alliance with Pakistan, with China and Russia, or I mean, they can choose which countries they want to, but they must have a strong military alliance so that no adventurer in future thinks of going and conquering Afghanistan. Thank you very much.
Well, Jazakallah for that. And I just want to, again, the announcement that came through from Salman Khan, and that his now official Kashmiri leader, Sayyid Ali Shah Jilani, has passed away at the age of 92. And he has been the face of the struggle in Jammu and Kashmir, and also spent a lifetime fighting for Kashmir, who stood tall in the face of endless persecution and abuse. And we've seen a comment come through from Chief Minister and the Democratic Party's leader, Mehbooba Mufti, who said, saddened by the news of Jilani Sahib's passing away. We may not have agreed on most things, but I respect him for his steadfastness and standing by his beliefs. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant him Jannah, and condolences to his family and well wishes. And with that announcement, it brings us to the end of another edition of Wednesday Nights with Inayat Wadi. Once again, quite a robust and enjoyable panel discussion with our panelists this evening. We've got Sheikh Umar Sharif out of India, Attorney Ziad Patel, Salman Khan, and Dr. Shahida Wizarat. To all of you, Jazakallah khairan for your time, for your participation this evening with us here on Salam Media. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam, and thank you very much. Thank you.
Well, that brings us to the end, and to our listeners, our viewers, wonderful having you with us once again. And until we meet once again next week, same time, same place. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.